Good morning, everybody. Wednesday, November 29th. It is NFL week number 13. And here on the week 13 preview, we will go through each and every game. We'll talk every side, every total. We'll also talk about some props and games that you may want to consider for the busy week ahead coming up. If you're watching this after the live stream has concluded, in the timeline down below, you're going to be able to jump ahead to each game on the card. So if you're here and you want to find out thoughts on a specific game, side, or total, you can jump forward to that spot within the timeline, as well as in the description of the video down below. All of the games are listed with time slots as well. Hope everybody had a fantastic Thanksgiving weekend. Hope everybody enjoyed a couple days off as well. Looks good to see a lot of familiar faces here in the chat as we get going here on this Wednesday, week 13 morning. Before we get into the too high, too low segment, there's a couple important things that I want to bring up now, and I'm going to bring them up as well a little bit later. First and foremost, last week's video. I just want to bring this up because I went through. It was a record-setting video. Thank you, everybody who took the time to watch it. Had almost 6,000 views, finished right around 5,950. But something alarming showed up within the video. I'm going to pull it up on screen right now. 49% of everybody that watched that video is not a subscriber here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. So there's a lot of people, almost 3,000 people watched the video last week who are not subscribed to the channel. If you are finding these videos valuable, you're getting little bits of information that you can use towards your wagers, the subscribe button is down below. If you have not yet hit it, you're watching in the YouTube app, you're watching on YouTube within the browser, you've got the YouTube account, hit the button down below. We're going to keep doing these videos each and every Wednesday. We're going to have more videos coming out as well. So if you like the videos and you're finding them valuable, the subscribe button is down below. Always helps to leave the thumbs up as well. I'm going to keep everybody sort of in check. I'm going to remind you as we go later in the show as well. And Jonathan says, first live stream I've been able to make it. Let's go. It's about time to have you live on the live stream. As always, you can watch this back after 2. Ryan Roberts says, getting dressed up. Well, we're into the month of December. Lululemon's kind of put on the side. We're back to the Untuck It for a little while. We'll see how it goes. So we're kind of navigating the seasonal changes here in Northwestern Canada. Carpenter's Card says lots of great reads last week. That's the goal with the show. Again, if you found it valuable, you found anything that helped you out making a bet, maybe you ended up making a bet and you won, subscribe button is down below. There's also the thumbs up that is available too. Second important note of business. We'll pull it up right now on the screen. Everybody here obviously loves football, and we love football too. And we have the bowl season service now live on raspicks.com/CFB, as well as raspicks.com/order. Bowl season scheduling will be out very soon. First release may go out as early as Monday morning. We'll keep everybody up to date. For those of you who have followed the podcasts, have followed the shows, you will remember the success of the bowl season podcast last season with Eddie Walls, as well as Michael Craig. This year, the entire team at RAS is getting involved. So we will have at least 10 bowl releases throughout the month of December, beginning as early as next Monday. And we will be giving those away for $3.95 on the site. So it's something that everybody is able to get involved with. If you are going to be watching or betting the bowls this bowl season, I highly recommend getting involved. A lot of changes, a lot of uncertainty with a lot of teams. Nobody's better at discerning all of the information, distilling it down to find the best bets than the team at Red Angle Sports. So if you're interested in the bowls, it's definitely something I recommend getting involved with. www.raspicks.com/order or /CFB as well, if you'd like to get into the bowl service, which begins as early as Monday. So if you're sub before Monday, you will not miss any potential bets. All right, let's get to it. As always, we begin with the highs and lows. So your goal here in the live chat is to say which team is too high, which team is too low. These are standard market ratings that we are using. The rank of the team is in the left-hand column. The second column tells you what the team's rating was last week. We're into week 13. A lot of these are settled. A lot of these are not moving a whole ton each and every week, but we do see some movement on a week-to-week basis. Again, these all come from closing lines and final scores, which gets you into the rankings. So this is a pretty good reflection of how these teams are being bet against their opponents each week. And on the right-hand side, we have the strength of schedule. In the middle, we have offense and defense. Starts off with Insight saying, how are the Bolts in the top 10? I agree with that. A lot of that has to do with how they're played against their schedule so far. If you look at the past strength of schedule, they've played the 5th most difficult schedule of opponents. And then this week, they're a lofty 6-point favorite on the road at New England, a game we'll absolutely talk to. I'll start off, as always, the last couple of shows, we've been pretty spot on. We've had Denver underrated for a couple of weeks. And then last week, we had Chicago underrated as they shoot up now from 30th all the way to 23rd, starting to get into the right range. So in terms of being overrated, we'll go back to an old favorite, LA Rams at 12. LA and the Rams, this is not a top 12 team in the NFL. It just isn't. Last week, they were borderline high. We've talked about them being high a lot this season when they were in the 14 to 16 range. This is a team that is a bottom 10 team in the NFL. I think that this is much too high. Their offense is getting a ton of credit. A lot of that rating changed based on what they did last week, as we see they jumped from 16 to 12. Their offense last week went from 18 or 19th all the way up to 13th. Their defense getting away with a ton. Future strength of schedule is 17th, right around league average in the NFL. Kyron Williams coming back definitely changes that offense. Him playing alongside Cooper Kupp with Atwell and Nakua, very good options, but this is not a team that is 12th in the NFL. And so to me, LA right now, definitely overrated within the market. In terms of being underrated, I thought about this quite a bit. I don't think it's substantially off. I think Tennessee maybe has the potential to surprise a little bit down the stretch. They're at 24th right now. If I'm putting a ceiling on the Titans, it's probably going to be like 19 to 20. So it's not off by a ton. But I do think that maybe Tennessee starting to become a little bit undervalued. Haven't really moved at all the last couple of weeks, have been locked right in this spot. Offense continues to dip a little bit further. But I think about the Titans team. They want to run the football. They want to be physical up front. They've gone through a 4-week stretch, with the exception of last week where we started to see it change a little bit, where they were just facing brutal run defenses, really good defensive fronts. Will Levis was really tested early. He's been forced to throw it downfield a ton as teams blitz and bring extra pressure to try and make him uncomfortable. I think that all kind of settles down. And their future strength of schedule is the 9th most difficult, but it's kind of a misleading 9th just because some of the teams that remain in that schedule have had some changes as well. So I think Tennessee at 24th, maybe a tad underrated relative to how they are being bet. And so Rams overrated, Titans underrated. I think the Broncos now have met their level, jumping all the way up to 16th. We were on them kind of like 24th, 25th. They're now improving up. As well, the Bears made a pretty significant jump. The Bears were the biggest jump last week, 30th to 23rd now, which I think is pretty suitable for the Chicago team. Check out the comments here. We're having, again, the Bolts really stood out for a lot of people inside the top 10. Appreciate all the comments coming through as well. Jets, Pete, with me. Rams just feel too high. Completely agree. David Rosansky says Miami, too high. And that's the same thing with Pay D. Also seeing Miami, a couple other spots as well. Miami is 4th. Interesting read for how great that offense is and how much that defense continues to prove. The thing I would say with Miami, defensively right now, they are 12th. That's a number that continues to climb each week. I think the Dolphins defense finishes top 6, top 7. I really think that defense has some room to improve yet with how that scheme and that system for Fangio takes time, how many injuries they had early. I think the Dolphins, again, they don't have much higher to go than 4th, obviously, but a lot of that rating right now comes from their offense, which is rated number 1 in the NFL. If we see that defense tick up, that's going to push Miami up a little bit. So I don't agree with Miami being too high, but I obviously note the fact that they don't have a lot higher to go. Brian says the Bears, don't know if he meant too high, too low. I'm guessing, oh, there we go. He says Bears is too high. I disagree with that. Brian just kind of got into why. Ryan says Atlanta seems a hair low. I agree with that. That was going to be my number 2 along with Tennessee. So that's a good call by you there, Ryan. Rich says the Browns are too low. The Browns don't have a quarterback. They maybe have one starting this week that maybe not a lot of people are fully expecting. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. Jason says Browns too low, Chargers too high. That's kind of the common sentiment overall, that the Chargers are too high, Browns are too low. Rich in there as well, saying that LAC at 10 is too high too. So that certainly seems sentiment. Adam comes in and says Broncos 15, Colts 16, New Orleans 18. Guessing you're saying those are all too high too, as Pink Tigers is in with that as well. Two more questions here before we get into the games. Saw a question, where do these numbers come from? This is from Unpredictable. Pardon me if I missed pulling that up. I saw that come through as well. And then Connor Frazier, where is a good website to find QB stats versus man-zone coverage scheme, as well as what the rate at which team play those coverages? I use SIS, which is Sports Info Solutions. Might be a little bit tough price-wise for just average folks following along. If it's something that you really value, you're big into fantasy, you're big into betting, you want all of those stats, I would recommend checking them out. They have everything broken down into a pretty comprehensive search database, and you can pull up almost anything when you're looking at that all the way around. So I would definitely go over and look at SIS for an option for that, Connor, if you're looking for those specific stats. All right, let's get into it. Starting off with the Seahawks on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas, a 9-point favorite across the board with two exceptions. Chris, the most respected book within the market, is 9.5 minus 105. Circa 8.5 minus 110 aside. Total in this game, we saw some over money come into the market this morning. 46.5s are now out to as high as 47.5s. Start with the total. I think that's an interesting spot to start that's different from what I've kind of been talking about all week. We'll get into the side in a second. Market is suggesting that there is going to be points in this game. I think this is largely driven by the Cowboys and how many overs they have been playing to as their offense continues to soar and their pass rate continues to go through the roof relative to expectation. Dallas is just throwing the ball a ton. Prescott is playing incredible. And you think about this Seahawks defense, looked really good the first 8 weeks against some weaker competition. Since then, they've had to step up in class, and they have really struggled. And so easy to see why there's continued sort of following in on this total for a Cowboys game with an over that was priced inside the mid-40s. I would tend to agree with that. However, there's one exception that stands out to me, and that's really going to be, are you going to get enough from the Seahawks to drive this total and get it over? I don't know if they're the best partner for this total. Let me explain why. Geno Smith struggles immensely against man coverage. The Dallas Cowboys through 12 weeks play man coverage at the number 1 rate in the NFL. Geno Smith against man coverage has an average pass per completion of 3.5 yards. Against zone, it's 8.5. There's a 5-yard difference. That 5-yard difference for Geno between man and zone is the widest gap of any quarterback versus man-centric teams and zone-centric teams in the NFL. In other words, no quarterback excels more against zone and struggles more against man than Geno Smith. And so you think about what the Cowboys scheme does and how it plays right against the weaknesses of Geno Smith and is going to force him into facing a defense he's really not had success against. You also add in the fact that he is not 100%. You watch that broadcast against the 49ers. They kept going to the clip where he's lying dead on the table with his shirt off, and they're trying to do the interview with him. He's not 100%. And so with all of that said, I don't know if the Seahawks are the right partner for this over that is now into the higher 40s just because of that specific matchup. And so worries me a little bit from the total side. From the side perspective, I think if anything, we're now getting too high on Dallas. We saw buyback coming the other way at this number when it was leaning towards 10 yesterday. That's still possible. Like I see Jazz 9.5 minus 15. I see, again, Chris is still at 9.5. We're also seeing 9.5 at Ace and a couple other PPHs. So maybe you're looking at a potential 10 with Seattle at like minus 115, which is interesting to me. And like I go back to these market ratings, right? And we can pull them up. We see Dallas at number 2. They were bumped up from 3. This was actually a little bit higher earlier in the week for their overall rating. We see Seattle down at 14th. right? And so the difference between these two right now on a neutral field, based on how numbers have closed, is 7 points. If you're giving Dallas a bump for home field, you're getting to 8.5, right? If you're saying that Dallas is deserving to be a 10-point favorite, which is likely why you see an advantage with the Cowboys in this, that would kind of be the floor that you're making them. Nobody's making the Cowboys the number one team in the NFL. You're going to have them behind San Francisco. I think the case can be made that they're probably third or fourth, which means that if you're trying to get this number to 10 or potentially higher, that means you're really dropping the Seattle Seahawks down well below average. You're going to have to put them in that 19 to 21 range to get to 10 or higher here on the Cowboys. For me, that's discrediting the Seahawks too much. But again, there's that one specific matchup where you really might see the Seahawks struggle that I think that if you're back in the Cowboys, you can potentially lean on to justify. For me, if I was forced to do anything in this spot, I would look at Seattle at 9.5. I don't love it. I'm not going to do it, but I couldn't get into backing Dallas at this big of a price, laying this big of a number against a team like Seattle, which I just do not believe is in that 19 to 21 range to justify this price. I get Dallas is playing great football. I get that their offense is dominating, and I get that they're putting up huge games, and it's sort of the offense that we've wanted from the Cowboys for a long time. But I can't get there with that number, and I certainly couldn't get higher than it. It's just a question of, do you want to back Seattle and Geno against this matchup where he has such a long history of really struggling? So that's kind of the full synopsis that I have on this game. And it kind of brings me to a bigger point as we get into Sunday. People watching this stream, for the most part, are going to be stuck with a dilemma this week. Everyone watched the Thanksgiving Week 12 slate, have a ton of favorites, have a ton of overs. We all heard the headlines and read them and got into, everyone's talking about it, right? All these favorites are covering. And now we're looking at a Sunday slate with the Cowboys included on Thursday. We have a lot of big favorites on teams that are trending really well against these other teams with quarterback uncertainty, with coaching changes, with big question marks that are kind of waiting. And you have to make the case of, do you sort of bet against these teams where the floor might fall out and these really bad teams are still kind of overrated by the market collectively, and just go with the easy decision seemingly of backing these really good teams? Or do you force yourself into taking these bad teams at what are inflated numbers? Because as we go through the Sunday card, I mean, there's some point spreads here that are just crazy in terms of being what we would have expected a week ago to what we're seeing now. Like, there's some really big inflated numbers, but in each game, there's kind of one underlying key topic that you kind of have to look at and say, like, can you get behind that and can you trust it? And so there's going to be a lot of people that off of last week in week 12, they're like, I just want to take all the dogs. It's the NFL. Those underdogs are going to start covering. This has gone too far. And they're just going to back those underdogs blindly. There's going to be other people that say, nope, these teams are done. These teams are finished. I want the good teams. I'm going to lay these numbers, even if they are a little bit inflated. To me, I think the answer is a little bit in between. I don't think that there's sort of a blanket statement answer for this week as a whole. I think there's a lot of games to get really messy, and we'll talk about those. And it starts off with probably the messiest game on the board, with the Chargers on the road at the New England Patriots. And when I talk about crazy numbers and some of these prices being inflated, to think that this Chargers team can be laying 6 against anybody is just silly, because it's a defense that hasn't shown up all year and is among the worst in the NFL. And it's an offense that has Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. It's a two-man offense. There's no one else out there. And you see spurts where Keenan Allen gets taken away a little bit, and this offense is doing nothing. And you think about what the Pats historically defensively have done well, it's negating that top option from opposing offenses. Now, obviously, we're looking at a very different New England Patriots defense than what we've seen in years past, but it's not a tough task to stall down or slow down this Chargers offense when everything has to go through Keenan Allen for an effective passing game. And that game against the Ravens, that late drive, late third quarter, early fourth quarter, where the Chargers were down 2 scores and they brought it into the 3-point game, that was one of the most strenuous drives that I have watched all season long, was like 18 or 19 plays, took half a quarter. And even though the Chargers were playing up tempo and they were getting to the line quickly and they were snapping it quickly, there was not one easy yard that entire drive. And that's been the story for the Chargers basically all season. Like, there is just nothing there on offense beyond Keenan Allen. And Austin Eckler has been great in the passing game, but we've seen teams that don't have great defenses be able to scheme against that. Stopping a running back on these screen plays or these big gains when he's the second option is not a tough task for defenses to eliminate. It's a two-man offense for the Chargers, laying 6 points on the road in New England. It's a crazy number. However, here comes that debate that we're going to have with so many of these games all week. It's the teams versus numbers. If you're just betting the numbers, you're taking New England in 6, you're probably making it a very easy decision. However, the Pats are probably going to play multiple quarterbacks. We're hearing that both Jones and Zappi are going to start. We have seen the New England coaching staff fall off of a cliff. That endgame scenario against the Giants last week was inexcusable and indefensible at every level. It was as bad as you get, and to expect that from Bill Belichick was a complete embarrassment for the New England franchise and all of the fans watching. That was horrendous at the end of the game. But that's what you're getting with the Pats each and every week. And where I struggle with this is, on one hand, you have that ineptitude of play calling that we're seeing on a weekly basis. But on the other hand, you have New England with like sneakily decent offensive numbers, 280, 320, 350 yards. But then they just have these back-breaking turnovers as they get into opponent territory that have kept so many points off the board in the Colts game. We saw it 2 weeks ago. We saw it last week as well. And like, how can you trust New England to give you any sort of effort, even if you're getting a couple extra points? And the question becomes now, like, are the Pats even worse than they're being rated? I mean, there's a handful of teams right now that are just lingering on these like 2 and 3 win records that could see the floor completely fall out. And these may be even worse teams than we're talking about them now. And so this is a brutal game to go back and forth. And James brings up a good point. Like, the Pats are untouchable. I really think that they are. Last week, they take the pro money, but like everything they did in game was to throw that away and give that game to the Giants. I mean, that was all kinds of level of bad. Ricky brings up, were the Pats playing for OT instead of playing for a win? They were 1st and 10 at the 22-yard line of the Giants with 1:35 to play. And they elected to go run field goal attempt. And they missed. And they ran the clock out. Even if you're trying to play for OT, there is no way ever. It's illogical that you're looking at 1st and 10 to pick up 22 yards to win. If you're saying our quarterbacks are garbage, we're not going to make it, there is no world in which conceding that attempt of 22 yards to get into the end zone to win is a better option, relying on a kick that's about 75% to make, then a coin toss, and then needing to go either 75 yards off of a touchback the other way or get a stop and then go another 40 or 50 yards on top of that if you're able to stop the Giants and get the ball back. It made no sense, because if you don't trust your quarterback to get 22 yards with 1:35, why are you trusting him to go another 40 or 60 in overtime off of a stop? It doesn't make sense. And that's what you're getting from the Pats. And you're looking at 6, and it's just a team that's essentially, you can't bet them at this point. And so it's a stay away, but this is just a complete mess in New England. As a Jets fan, it brings me a little bit of joy, but as a bettor who's bet on New England a couple times, not so much joy in that regard. Let's move on. Lions on the road at the Saints. Detroit, a 4-point favorite across the board. Total in this game is 46, shaded over at Chris, 46 flat everywhere else across the screen, with the exception of Circa, which is at 45.5. There is no sort of argument that I can make where the Lions are justified as a 4-point favorite on the road at the Saints. And the market ratings would agree with that. When you're looking at the difference between these two teams, at most you're separating them by 3 points on a neutral. Obviously, the game is in New Orleans. You're giving a bump to the Saints for home field advantage. That would bring the price down into somewhere around the 2 to 2.5 point range. And you're looking at this game, Lions -4. You might be thinking, well, this is an easy decision. You should be taking the Saints here at home, getting 4 points. If by every line that we're looking at coming in, this should be a 2 or 2.5 point number. Here's the difference, and here's the problem. The Saints, unless Olave is able to be the first skill position player not named Brock Purdy able to start after suffering a concussion the week prior, unless he is the one guy that does that all season, the Saints will be without wide receivers 1, 2, and 3. They will be missing Olave. They will be missing Shaheed, and Michael Thomas is in on IR. And so now you're looking at a spot here where I think that these injuries have been fully priced in, and I think that there's an argument that can be made that it's maybe gone a little bit too far. There were pros that like Detroit at 3.5 and 4 earlier in the week. We saw it get to 4.5, which is currently the price at Circa. Some other places were 4.5, and there was some disagreement with that. The question really becomes, what are you going to get from this Saints offense? And they've struggled with all of those guys on the field, especially within the red zone. There has been communication issues between Derek Carr and the sideline for the last month and a half. And we've also seen them really struggle to get Alvin Kamara going as that guy that we've sort of come to know him to be the last couple of seasons. His age is showing. They're rotating in Miller. They're rotating in Williams. They're much more willing to go to other backs out of the backfield. And that run game with Taysom Hill, when they're getting into the red zone, just hasn't been deployed consistently enough to really negate a lot of those issues that we've seen from the Saints. And so if you take away any sort of deep shot potential with Shaheed and Olave out, I think that's really going to change what the Saints want to do on offense. And we're really going to see them lean on the run game, get Taysom Hill included a lot more. I think they're really going to try bring the variance down as low as possible within this game and try just grind this out deep into the game to have a chance to win. And so I really think a lot of ways that this plays out is just not conducive to a Lions cover. I think the Lions defense continues to be one of the more overrated units within the NFL. And we've seen Jared Goff now the last couple of weeks really struggle. Turnovers are coming back. The ground game consistency is starting to sort of wean a little bit once Goff is unable to get those deep shots downfield. And if we think about where Goff has struggled historically, it's on the road in these spots where he's going to be potentially under pressure and laying points. Just hasn't been historically a great spot for him. As with so many games this week, there's kind of a kicker and a caveat to that. Cam Jordan, the best defensive lineman for the Saints, he's dealing with an injury. Marshawn Lattimore, the best defensive back for the Saints, he is on IR. All of a sudden, you kind of start to see a little bit of path to success for the Lions offense. Let's see. But there's just no way that I can get comfortable with laying Detroit at this number, especially if it is 4.5. Ryan Roberts brings up the A.T. Perry prop. The guys can't talk enough, that being the Saints staff, about A.T. Perry and his prop outlook. He was a complete no-show until the final drive last week. So I don't know how to handle that as well. Devin says FanDuel 4.5. I actually just saw that light up on the screen as well. Got to 4.5 as well. So yeah, there's no way I could back the Lions in this spot at this number. Paul says Lions have won by double digits following a loss and 2 losses this season. Extended rest in a dome. To me, this is all priced in and then some based on where this number should have been. You combine the injuries with the spot, the extra rest. I really think that this is all accounted for within this number. Falcons on the road at the Jets. Atlanta, a 2.5 -20 favorite across the board with the Chris 3 even money. We're seeing 3 even money at Jazz and FanDuel as well. Total in this game is 34 and has been bet down from 35 and is shaded under in a couple of spots. Another game, another back and forth dilemma that you kind of have to battle internally. So the Falcons laying points on the road with Desmond Ridder to anybody, let alone a top defensive unit in the league, seems like a complete disaster. However, I would say that it's an equal, if not greater, disaster on the other side with Tim Boyle starting another game for the Jets. Probably one of the biggest surprises that I took away from the Thanksgiving week was that Tim Boyle is actually worse than Zach Wilson. I didn't think that it was necessarily possible to be worse than Zach Wilson, but Tim Boyle showed no signs of an improvement for him or this Jets offense. And so the Falcons defense has been consistent all season long. Above average unit. I don't think they're going to have much of an issue slowing down Tim Boyle. Something that's been very disappointing from the Jets is Breece Hall and his inability to get anything going on the ground. And it's been so much so that now in Jets press conferences, they're talking about getting Dalvin Cook more involved. They're trying to give more carries to Cook. They're trying to get Hall more open in the passing game. Tim Boyle is becoming sort of this master of checking it down. And so that could definitely be a path. But again, like how much are you leaning on that to be consistent throughout a game that defenses can't scheme around? I get he's explosive, and I get he can do a ton of space, but when there's nothing else threatening you, eliminating Breece Hall or any running back in the receiving game is not necessarily a difficult thing to end up doing. And so I know that this is kind of going to be an obvious look, and you're like, well, you got to take the Jets here, especially at 3, because it's such an easy option to fade Ritter and the Falcons on the road. But this is probably end of the line for the Jets. I mean, the season is gone now. The hype around Aaron Rodgers that was thrown out as a motivational tactic did not seem to work, as you did not get the spark from the offense. The switch from Wilson to Boyle after Robert Salah hung on for weeks was only done to save the defensive locker room from completely falling apart. Jeff Albrecht is getting just incredible performances out of his defense on a week-to-week basis. But now with the season out of reach, the Jets just seem like a team that I'm talking about where you might just see that floor fall out and this team just continue to slide down the ratings because you're just not getting a lot from it. And so, boy, as tough as it is to look at the Falcons, I could only look at Atlanta at 2.5 on the road in this one, as they now in top of the NFC South and playing to keep their playoff hopes alive. I think there's a lot more here for Atlanta than the Jets all the way around. Arizona Cardinals on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers 5.5-point favorites. Total in this game, 41. This is an over at 41. This is also a Steelers side for me at 5.5. Let's start with the total. The offensive reset last week for the Pittsburgh Steelers was definitely real. We saw with Matt Canada out and Sullivan in, there was a willingness to target the middle of the field, something that the Steelers did not do for the first 3 months within the season. And we talked about this a couple times on the show. You look at the Kenny Pickett passing charts, everything's out wide. The middle had no targets all season. It was incredible to see how difficult Matt Canada was making life for Kenny Pickett in the pocket. Nothing was made easy. Last week, we saw what happens when it is made easy for Kenny Pickett. He's not a great quarterback. He's very serviceable. Big uptick for the Steelers offense. Number 2, Pittsburgh's running game has actually been sneaky good for the last 4 weeks. Top 5 in the NFL. The catalyst behind that was Jaylen Warren getting more involved, getting more touches, getting more carries, being used in the receiving game more. It's a great mix, let alone great primary option to go along with Najee Harris. And we've seen Harris with these reduced carries playing off of Warren be a lot more successful too. So now you have a Steelers ground game to go along with a passing game that is made easier. Uptick for the Steelers offense. The Cardinals are a great partner for the over when you look at this. You think about where the Cardinals really struggle, it is defensively. They're one of the worst units in the NFL at stopping the run. And now without Kaiser White in the middle of the field, we saw what the Rams did with Kyren Williams. I could very easily see a similar path to success for a guy like Jaylen Warren without that key cover guy in the middle for this Cardinals defense. So not only are the Steelers going to have success being able to run the football, but now with Freiermuth back, the willingness to target the middle of the field, Warren in the passing game, the Steelers have a lot of options here on offense. On the other side, the Cardinals' offensive rebound with Kyler Murray coming back has been, I would call it a little bit underwhelming, a little bit disappointing. I would say that it's maybe disguised a little bit by some injuries. Marquise Brown has been banged up. Michael Wilson has been dealing with some injuries. James Conner just came off IR the same week that Murray came back, so he isn't fully acclimated in that first game or two. So it's not like this Cardinals offense has taken this big leap. And we've been able to play against the Cardinals a little bit and find success within that just because of that sort of perceived bump. Now that's being kind of priced properly. I do think, though, at a total now of 41, you're getting at least a little bit of upside with Murray and this Cardinals offense versus what you were going to get with this Cardinals team and team past. So I think everything here meshes up and lines up pretty well when you're looking at the over. In terms of the Steelers side, when I first did the podcast Sunday night, initial reactions, I was looking at this and I was like, this is high for Arizona at 6, kind of intrigued by the underdog. As the week has gone on, you're watching that Rams game back, you're seeing highlights, and you're like, here's a Cardinals team that has now shown the ability, or the inability rather, to stop kind of middle of the pack offenses, getting blown out by middle of the pack offenses. They're down key guys on defense. This is a team that can get beat up and blown out. And again, the Steelers last week had so many points unrealized from the scoreboard. They had 425 yards of offense, finished with 16 points. It's very difficult to do. And so I don't know, even with this number ticking up, if it's fully reflecting the Steelers' offensive reset. I definitely don't think that is the case in the total. And I do think from the side, this to me at less than 6 is certainly interesting for Pittsburgh. And so that is my look within this game. I like the total much more than I do the side, but I would look Steelers at less than 6, and then that over at 41, I think is a very good look on the card this week. We have a couple more early games, but the rotation numbers were switched. We'll go in rotation order. So we'll get into the Panthers on the road at the Buccaneers now. Tampa Bay, a 5.5-point favorite. Total in this game from 39.5, now down to 37. Open portion of Buccaneers practice this morning did not have Baker Mayfield throwing nor practicing. There was a tweet that had a video camera on the field, and they just showed Baker Mayfield walking around. He wasn't doing anything. He suffered the ankle injury in the first quarter against the Colts last week. Didn't look himself the rest of the game. On Monday morning, there was the report that came out that said he was dealing with extreme soreness in the ankle. He's banged up. What we know about Baker Mayfield at this time is that he's just a tough and annoying guy from a betting perspective, because he just does not sit out unless he is forced to sit out. And so I think we are going to see Baker Mayfield start for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I do not think that he is 100%. And so I think that devalues the Buccaneers a little bit within this spot. It's also a Buccaneers team that has looked much better when playing catch up and playing from behind. That's really when their passing game has opened up. That's really when their play calling has become more efficient. The Buccaneers are a great team when they're playing from behind, like we saw against the Colts. Offense opens up, the big plays come through. When they're in a neutral game state or leading, not the best team, not the most well-called offense. Play calling skews a lot more run heavier in those situations, becomes a lot more inefficient. I just don't like the role of the Buccaneers laying this big of a number. On the other side, a very interesting reset for the Carolina Panthers. We've talked about the Thomas Brown play calling reset. Worked out very well for the first game against Houston. Not so much after. But now the main sort of source and root of the problem, Frank Reich, he is gone. Dave Tepper comes out, cleans house, gets rid of Frank Reich, another mid-season coach firing. You now have special teams coach Chris DeBoer stepping in, and you have Thomas Brown taking over play calling duties. Here's a couple sort of interesting things to think about within this. Chris DeBoer is incredibly emotional on the sidelines as a special teams coach. I was watching some of his introductory interviews as well as going back in videos, and everybody talks about how he's this kind of like quiet, stoic guy when he's kind of off to the side, but in game, he's just kind of a bit of a maniac. And there's videos of him screaming at guys and running down sidelines and getting in the faces of guys. I think the fact that he survived the last regime change within Carolina, survived this regime change this season, kind of goes to show what kind of guy he is. And I actually think it's a decent sort of players coach promotion for him at head coach that probably doesn't have like the same realized effects as what the Raiders had going to Antonio Pierce. But I actually think it's a bit of a notable bump with him stepping in, because Frank Reich was a guy who was like completely silent, stoic on the sidelines, said nothing. There was very little motivational aspect from him. He has fallen off so much over the last couple of years as a head coach. Now you kind of get this interesting change coming in. All of this to say, Carolina Panthers are not going to flip into some great team. I don't think they have much of a ceiling beyond where they are, which is 31st or 32nd, depending which ratings you look at within the NFL. I don't think there's going to be this night and day switch. The offense is void of weapons. They don't have guys that can get open. Bryce Young is really struggling. It's been made very hard. The interesting storyline to me within this game is that players now have come out and started to talk about how upset they were that Frank Reich took play calling duties back from Thomas Brown. And if you're looking at what the players are saying, they're saying that they preferred play calling with Thomas Brown. There's an interesting kind of back and forth that's emerging where the front office, so Tepper, who middles in Panther seasons time after time again, but kind of nothing was directly pointed. The front office wanted more RPO play from Bryce Young. Frank Reich came out and blocked it. And he says that RPOs are not a part of my offense, which is really confusing because Frank Reich used RPOs in his time in Philly to get the Eagles to the Super Bowl. And so there was clearly something going on where the front office wanted Bryce Young to fit into this offense and do a certain style of play, RPO-based, that fits where he has excelled in the past. And Reich was blocking it. And now you have this players' commentary that is supporting that, like, hey, we liked what Brown was doing better. We liked where the offense was potentially going to go with him. And there's kind of like this distrust, which led to the firing of Reich. And so now, like, I go back to a story from a year ago where Tepper came down and handed a random play on a note card to the offense and said he wanted that play run in that game that was coming up that week. Had nothing to do with anything. But I actually think that the Panthers might get away with a little bit here if there's this front office mandate that wants more RPO play, which would absolutely free Bryce Young up from just being a straight drop back pocket passer. There's potentially options there you see now with Sanders healthy and Hubbard having a good season where it's like, okay, now maybe there's something around the identity to go for the Panthers offense. And you have this coaching change and reset, which get a little bit more of a motivational bump from the Panthers, kind of like what we saw against the Houston Texans. All of this to say, the Panthers so far this season are 16th in RPO usage rate over the course of the season. So it's not like Reich completely ignored them and didn't do anything around them. But I do think we see that rate jump up, and this team looks like what Tepper wants it to look like, which isn't necessarily a good thing long term. But in this one game, in a classic reset spot against the Buccaneers, who have a bit of a banged up quarterback who's going to play, but now you have the reset, and you're getting 5.5 or 6 points with the Panthers, kind of looks interesting to me. So I like the Panthers here as an underdog. I think you get a bit of a bump. And if you want to talk about a prop look within this, while Bryce Young is going to be asked to run more RPOs, very likely means that Bryce Young is going to be running the football more. And so that's coming directly from ownership. It's very likely the interim head coach obliges to that, as does the new play caller. Probably see Bryce Young willing to run the football a little bit more within this. So keep an eye out for that when it comes to prop looks within this. Robert Brandt says, Bowles presser about 45 minutes ago says he expects Baker to play. I do too. I think that he is going to be less than 100%, though, within this as well. Next game up, Colts on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Pardon me. Indy now a 1-point favorite across the board. At times, the Titans yesterday showed up as a 1-point favorite. This is now Indy -1. Total in this game, 42.5. Haven't seen the full over money wave come in yet, which I'm fully expecting with the Shane Steichen overs that continue to play through. You're also down Jonathan Taylor for the Indianapolis Colts, so that's going to take a little bit away from the run game. You think about how the Colts match up against the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee, very good defending the run up front, not good at defending the pass. So if you have the Colts now down Jonathan Taylor, their main running back, going back to Zach Moss, who's been very good, this is a game where Steichen is smart enough to realize that he wants to attack the Tennessee Titans defense by throwing the football more. On the other side, as I mentioned, I think the Tennessee Titans offense perhaps just a little bit underrated based on how they've played the last couple of weeks against great run-stopping defenses. It's really taken that part of their game away, matched up against the Indianapolis Colts and how they play defense. Tennessee is going to be able to run the football. They're going to be able to find yardage at the line of scrimmage and control the game up front. And so that's going to give Tennessee a bit of an out here on offense and probably free Will Levis up a little bit as well within this. And so I think we see over money come in. I think we see the Colts attack a pass funnel Titans defense, and then the Titans be able to run the football to free up Levis to find big plays. I think it's going to be a bigger game for Hopkins as well against this Indianapolis secondary, especially if we're seeing starters still down and the Colts continuing to push forward with undrafted free agents and seventh-round rookies starting within that secondary. I do think Hopkins stands out and has a big game. In terms of the side, I agree with the movement to Tennessee. This was 2 on Tuesday. It was 2 yesterday morning. We've seen Titans money come in. I think we might still see a little bit of Tennessee money come into the market as well. I think we could see this get down to a pick 'em. Don't love much from the side necessarily, but I could only look at backing Tennessee within this, but more intrigued by that over as a whole. Austin brings up a point for Abel, 28-17 ATS as an underdog, 6-4 as a coach against Indy. Titans front four versus Indy backfield without Taylor value. I would disregard both of those trends. I mean, you're essentially looking at the Titans as a pick 'em at this point, the way the market is leaning. And then the 6-4 against Indy, that has not come against Shane Steichen, which is a massive upgraded head coach. So I wouldn't look at that specifically, but I do think I agree with Garrett where you got to look at Tennessee here. Yes, I would agree that with that too as well. So I think that this is a spot for the Titans, but I do think that over sees money as well. Miami Dolphins on the road at the Washington Commanders. Miami, a 9.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 50. Another top team in the NFL laying a big number against the team that you're kind of writing off for dead in the Washington Commanders. This is kind of the story of every game this week. We've already talked about a lot of these. When I look at this game specifically, you kind of have to start with Washington changing things on the defensive side. Ron Rivera is now taking over defensive play calling as Jack Del Rio is out. There were other secondary staffers on the defensive side for Washington let go as well. Washington has not been able to stop the pass all season. They have given up a ton of explosive plays against. They're still dealing with a couple of injuries within the secondary as well. Ron Rivera is a defensive coach. The Riverboat Ron moniker is one of the most misused and misguided nickname namings of all time. That is not who Ron Rivera is. However, I don't think that Ron Rivera, even as a defensive coach, something he has not done for a long time is call defensive plays. I don't think that that's something that you can comfortably bet on. I don't know how big of a bump it is going to be either. And if anything, if you kind of look at this situation, Ron Rivera is coaching to save his job. At this point, he probably sees the way that this is trending, but he gets the scapegoat firing as Jack Del Rio gets let go. And now Ron Rivera takes ownership of the defense as the defensive head coach. This is now his chance the next 6 weeks to save his job and try get into next season. When we see defensive coaches take over the defense from the head coaching role and then bring back defensive play calling duties, what that typically leads to is the offense being slowed down. Because what is the easiest way to make a defense that you're now coaching look better than not giving the other team a lot of possessions and chances to score? You know your defense is bad. Ron Rivera taking over is not going to fix the Commanders' defensive problems. The Commanders' defensive problems is they traded away their best pass rushers and they have no talent within the secondary. And so now if Rivera is going to be judged on the defensive performance the rest of the way, he's not wanting the offense to quickly go up tempo, try score, push downfield, and have the risk of going 3 and out and giving the ball back to the opponent, let alone the Miami Dolphins in his first game, who hung 70 points on a Broncos team earlier in the season. If that happens this week and it's a bad showing, Ron Rivera is as good as gone when it comes to the end of the season. And so what has been interesting around the Commanders is their willingness to be sort of pushing the ball downfield. The last month or so, we've seen their pass rate tick up. We've seen their tempo versus expectation tick up. We've seen Sam Howell be a willing passer. There's been some interesting offensive angles around the Commanders. I think all of those now get stalled out. And I think Rivera kind of hangs on for dear life. and tries to get something out of this Commanders offense. Perfect example to compare this to Buffalo with McDermott taking back the play calling duties on defense. We saw how that went for the offense so far for the Bills this season and the dilemma that has brought in. And so I think that this is now a tough spot for Washington going forward. But I don't think that you're kind of looking at Washington and being like, okay, I'm going to downgrade this team lower. They're already bottom of the league, bottom of the barrel. And so I'm not interested in this total at 50 as high scoring of games as Washington has found themselves in. I think that they really try to slow things down. And I also think that the Dolphins defense continuing to improve under Fangio is going to be tough for Howell and company to deal with as well. And so for me, this game is a stay away on both the side of the total, but keep an eye out for that on what Rivera does to this offense as we go forward. Giselle Thacker, contest-wise, at what point do you start weighing picking outliers and or simply going against what you think will be the most popular picks? I'm just clicking like crazy here as I try to get rid of it. Honestly, I'm not a good person to ask that question to. There's so much that goes into the weekly theory that is personal dependent and what your outlook is or what you want. If you're really valuing the potential prize money that you're in and you want to hang on to that, it's a very different strategy than if you're not valuing that as much and you value trying to win the contest as a whole. It's very similar to hedging, which is a common question. How do I hedge this? What should I do with it? It really comes down to what you want to get out of it. And so I kind of avoid answering those questions, first of all, because I'm not good at answering them. And most times I don't know the answer. But then second, any answer that I might give you may not align with your personal situation. And that'll maybe just lead you to something that is uncomfortable for you to begin with as well. And so I wish I had a better answer than that. But the answer that I have is that I don't know. And I'm not great at answering those questions to begin with. Dice Capital says Rivera is hard to deal with. Absolutely, he is. Michael says sounds like an underspot. As I was saying that in my mind, the cranks kind of got going, and I think that makes sense too. Brian Rhodes, is Sam Howell a top 15 QB? No, he is not. Devin Barth, did I miss Denver versus Houston? Denver versus Houston is coming up next. But we had the Carolina-Tampa game switched in rotation. That's 4-5-9, 4-6-0. It got switched to a late game, so we're pushing forward within that too. Before we get to that game as well, just want to remind everybody, as I see 250 people now on the stream, the bowl service at raspicks.com is now available. If you're a football fan, you're watching the bowl games in December, you want to be on these plays, you want to get these plays, 10 plays at minimum on bowl games in December for college football for $3.95 from the team at Right Angle Sports. That is now live on the site. If you subscribe before Monday, you will not miss any plays. It is possible the first release is going to be on Monday. Regular season record for college football, 58%, 67 and 47. Last three seasons, 61%. 151 and 94. These are going to be the best bowl plays that you can get. So go over to raspicks.com/order if you want to be involved with the bowl subscription. Be sure to subscribe before Monday to ensure you do not miss any potential plays. A couple more games to go here on the card. Evan, we will get to Survivor Talk at the end as always. Denver on the road at the Houston Texans. Houston now out to a 3.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 47. As well as some 47.5 shaded to the over. We saw very real money on the over come in yesterday and the day prior. This is the Houston Texans team that continues to get bet over each and every week with C.J. Stroud willing to throw the football, with the coaching staff wanting to throw the football and trying to push downfield. Even off of the game against Jacksonville, we saw C.J. Stroud come out again, be like, it wasn't clicking. It wasn't working. We weren't quite hitting the big plays, but I'm going to keep throwing. I'm going to keep pushing the ball downfield. I still want to be throwing the football more. That's becoming the Houston Texans' identity within this. And we're going to see that keep going. That is why we're continuing to see Houston games get bet over each week. The Denver Broncos defense, a unit we've talked about a lot on the show. Currently, market ratings have them 24th. This is a unit during the 5-game win streak that has 16 turnovers. They have the highest EPA gained off of turnovers in this win streak league-wide. What does that mean? It means that the Broncos have benefited from turnovers as a defense more than any other unit the last 5 games in the entire league. And you think about some of the teams that the Broncos have played within that stretch, it's been a tough schedule, and they've got away with a lot of it. And so when you're looking at this over, as well as when you're looking at the Houston Texans as a side potential, you're kind of looking at that and saying, okay, here's a Broncos team that the last couple of weeks against teams that really struggle to run the football have given up a lot of yardage on the ground. They've given up a lot of field space. And they've got away with a lot of it because of the turnovers that they have been able to force, which has kept points off of the board. Now they're going on the road into Houston. Situation changes against this over team that the Houston Texans are. And there's a lot of anticipation within the market that it's kind of going to meet its level for the Broncos defense, which was a struggling unit to begin with at the start of the season, has had this resurgence. But there's a lot of non-believers in the resurgence because it's been aided by so many turnovers. An interesting look within this. So when we think about Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for Houston, the first 8 weeks of the season, he really wanted to run the football. He wanted to get Dameon Pierce going. He wanted Singletary as the number 2. He's the San Francisco guy that came over, and it wasn't working. The offensive line had injuries. Pierce was really struggling off the injury that he had last year. The run game wasn't there. And CJ Stroud kind of stepped in and took over, and he's like, I want to throw it more. And Houston has shifted into this team that wants to throw it more. Now, the last 2 weeks, we've seen Houston and throwing it more kind of peter out at times. They've had some back-breaking turnovers of their own. That Arizona game, they lived inside the Arizona 30-yard line. Last week, they had some drives stall out. And so now you're looking at this, and maybe it's the first time in a little while that we've seen the Texans have support for this aggressive passing game from the ground game, because they get a Broncos team that you can run on. But it's also a spot where now it's like, okay, maybe we're easing up a little bit from the Stroud stuff. We're going to run it a little bit because we can. And if Houston can kind of balance things out with a little bit of a ground game, not go to 50-50, still let Stroud pass downfield, still be aggressive, still push it, but just have that sort of second option on the ground. I really think that that's going to be a great matchup for Houston within this spot. And I think that we can see that show through. And so I like Houston as a side here at the total and how much it's been bet up. Don't love running to go over on this, but I think we're going to see a lot of people continue to bet into the overs. Garrett says Denver turnover regression coming, but Stroud just had a rough game and threw some INTs. That's exactly it. So that's kind of why you're looking at this and you're seeing that divide overall. Joe brings up a terrific point. The issue with regression, turnover luck is the timing. That's exactly it. It's almost impossible to time when you're trying to get it right and time that spot where everything comes back to earth. But now, again, it's a step up for the Broncos after playing Cleveland, after playing Minnesota and Dobbs, right? Now it's on the road against Houston, an offense that's clicking pretty well, now has another out with their run game, starts to look like an advantageous spot to try to time that as well. Whenever looking at Denver, you have to acknowledge the effect that Mike Westhoff have. Denver is always going to win special teams battles. Tough thing to handicap overall there, Jets Pete, for sure. Afternoon slate. San Francisco 49ers on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. San Francisco, a 3-point favorite across the board. Total in this game, 46.5. I'm surprised to see there not be interest in the Eagles at 3. I would have thought once we got to 3, that was going to be the side that was taken. Maybe that is something that materializes late in the week, but I'm surprised to see it still sitting there as we get into the later stages of Monday morning here on the West Coast. Here's what everybody is going to say and talk about when it comes to the 49ers. They have this game circled. That's the big thing. We think back to the playoffs last year. That was one of the weirder, wilder post-game series of press conferences where a team just failed to own up to a loss and were just insistent that they were the better team in the better spot and they had the better players. And we have seen the 49ers and Deebo Samuel continue to double down against how he would have owned that game, how the 49ers were going to win, how the 49ers were the better team. It was bizarre, and it hasn't stopped, and it's still happening this week. Everyone's going to talk about the 49ers' motivation, that spot, how they've wanted to play towards this game, how their offense is trending up. Like, I get all of it. Something else that I would add on top of that. The Eagles played the Chiefs and the Bills within a 6-day window. They were on the field for more than 150 plays on defense against both of those. I actually think it was into the 160s. So it's 160 defensive plays within 6 days with rain and cold and wind, right? 2 ugly games against top AFC opponents. In both of those games, the Eagles fell way behind early in the first half, got beat up badly, had to come back, go to overtime against the Bills. It was a crazy 6-day window for the Eagles. You have to wonder now against the 49ers, who come in off of the Thanksgiving game against Seattle with the extra time to rest, with the extra time to prep, but also with the much easier schedule run-in where the 49ers are not going through the gauntlet of the best teams in the AFC. They're getting some layups on the way into this game. That's all kind of coming to a head within this spot as well. And so it's Eagles rest disadvantage, it's schedule disadvantage, it's potentially motivational disadvantage, it's recent play disadvantage, like everything slanted towards the 49ers. And I think that's why we're getting to the point here where it's San Francisco laying 3 points on the road, a number that is suggesting that on a neutral field, the 49ers are 4 to 4.5 points better than the Eagles, and that's probably giving Philadelphia a bit of a discount. And I kind of stop and look at this, and I'm like, all right, all season long, we have been talking about, well, I shouldn't say all season, for the last 5 weeks, we've kind of been referencing back to that point, and somebody brought it up here on the comments. Die Capital, we had the interview here on the channel at RAS Picks with Matthew Davidow. And we were talking about how he was just adamant that the Eagles were the number 1 team in the NFL. And that was right when the Eagles were going into the difficult part of the schedule. And as much as I want to criticize how the Eagles have played in that game, I don't think that there's another team within the league that could come out in the situation that the Eagles are at 10-1, going through this difficult stretch of the schedule, being able to come back, being able to win those games, and being in a positive spot out of those, despite all of those. And so you now have this spot where the Niners have been rated high all season. You have all of these angles piling on top of them. You have all this interest. You have all of these sort of supporting spots for them within this game and this situation. And I look at it, I'm like, I kind of like to side with the Eagles here at 3. To me, this number has just got a little bit too far out, a little bit. I mean, this has become a pretty big early season sort of stance here with 2 of the top teams in the league that I think has gone just a little bit too far all the way around. I really think a lot of this is now priced in, perhaps priced in too much, and you're starting to see a little bit of value with the Eagles side at home in this specific situation. So that would be my take here, is Eagles at 3 become interesting to me in this spot. Jets Pete, Adam, question for you in this great game. Which position unit is the worst on the field? Isn't it the San Francisco secondary? Feels like Hurts can really exploit matchups with San Francisco secondary banged up. Worst unit on the field. Either it's very close between both secondaries. The Eagles secondary has been incredibly disappointing all season long. I really think that the Eagles defensive line is going to have to get pressure up the middle to disrupt Purdy, which is something I think is really needed to be noted, because Purdy, when he's faced that interior pressure, has really struggled. And he's been able to get away with it just because the Niners have been in such commanding leads and commanding situations. But when we've seen him really struggle, it's when that interior pressure gets home. And so the Eagles are really going to have to shut out the run, and they're really going to have to find a way to get pressure up the middle to protect that secondary. I would say, Jets Pete, it's very close between both secondaries, but I kind of think that the Eagles secondary maybe is a little bit worse than the 49ers. It might be the worst unit on the field, is how I would say that. So, yeah, I would. Ryan agrees with that. The Eagles secondary is just as bad. I think it might be a little bit worse if we're looking at that. Let's keep going. Browns on the road at the LA Rams. Third final game to go here on the card. This was such a silly number earlier in the week. Rams were 5-point favorites. They're now down to 3.5. All signs point to Joe Flacco starting. I think there's probably a 60 to 65% chance that he is the starter for Cleveland. If that is announced as the case, we are going to see this number come down further. As bad as DTR has been, I think PJ Walker is a worse option, but I think Joe Flacco is better than both of them. I think some of that realization is beginning to be priced in, as this number was, again, 5, which is just insane. Now it's down to 3.5. Still kind of crazy, but still a number that I think comes in a little bit. If Flacco starts and is ruled in, I think it gets to a soft 3 for the Rams. I think this number comes down. So if you're anticipating Flacco starting in this game, I would take Cleveland at 3.5 and have that sitting there if you have not already taken the Cleveland Browns. I think we see that number come down. There was good news for Cleveland with Myles Garrett. That was not a serious injury that he sustained. After the game on Sunday, he said he heard something pop. And so all signs point to him being out on the field as well. Amari Cooper, still uncertain as well, but he's one of the tougher guys too. What I will say is if it is Flacco starting, and if you lose Myles Garrett and you lose Amari Cooper, this probably closes 3.5. If you get Cooper, Garrett, and Flacco starting, I think cheap 3 is probably where this gets to, maybe even threatens through to get to 2.5. That might be a bit extreme for the upgrade for Flacco. David says he grabbed the Browns +5, so I hope Flacco does start. I think that's a terrific bet, and I think that was a pretty easy one to make at the open, especially if you listen to the podcast, you heard that as well. So that's really going to decide where this number goes. In terms of the Rams, we talked about Kyren Williams last week. There were comments in the video last week about it. Everybody kind of got a little piece of that and had success with it. The Rams offense benefited from that Cardinals defense a lot. They benefited specifically from the Cardinals defense living life without Kaiser White, their best linebacker, their best tackler in the middle of the field. That was just easy. And Matt Stafford against soft zone like that is always going to do well. He's always going to do great. Now you have the Rams facing the complete opposite style of defense, right? The Cleveland Browns, second highest man coverage rate in the NFL. Jim Schwartz, pressure a ton without having to bring the blitz. When he does, the pressure rate spikes through the roof. This is such a different style and category and matchup for the Rams defense. And it's one that Stafford and the Rams have struggled with all season. And I don't think that this game is going to be an exception to it. There are going to be comments, inevitably, that you see about the Browns defense being worse on the road than it is at home. A lot of that is schedule influenced by who they have played, when they have played them, and how they have had to play them. It is not just the Browns go on the road, they're away from Cleveland and immediately drop into a bottom 10 defense in the league. And at home, because they're playing in Cleveland, they're the best unit in NFL. And so I'm not buying into that. Here we go. Zach, I honestly, I didn't see it, Zach. It was blower than this is schedule influenced for sure. And so I'm not buying into that as well. This is just such a different class for the Rams to step into. And we talked about it at the top of the show in high lows. The Rams are not the 12th best team in the NFL. That's not happening. So, this was crazy. If you get Flacco, good bet on the Browns. If not, and I can't see Cleveland forcing DTR, who clears concussion protocol if everything goes well on Friday, into starting this game on the road. I just don't see it happening. I do think they go to Flacco within this game. Let's see how that plays out. But in no way I could lay the Rams in this spot. Chiefs on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Kansas City, now, surprising to me, they're down to a 6-point favorite across the board. Total in this game is 42. There is a 5.5 showing currently at Pinnacle. Something I want to point out about the Green Bay Packers, who had the offensive outburst against the Detroit Lions on Thursday on Thanksgiving on the early week. There was a very interesting article that came out and said that the Detroit Lions, who typically play man coverage at a 20% rate in the NFL, spiked their man coverage usage to 55% on that Thanksgiving game, and they stuck with it the whole game. There was no changing away for the adjustment that the Lions tried to make against the Packers offense. The problem with what the Lions did is that defense plays such a high rate of zone coverage for a reason, because they don't have great man cover corners. And so Detroit took this huge gamble where they're like, we're going to try to catch Green Bay off guard. We think Jordan Love is very inaccurate. We're going to switch, throw a ton of man at Love and these Packers wide receivers. We think we can hang with them. And from the first series of the game, it was evident that they could not. And so it was bad timing for Detroit, not only from being just a bad, overrated defense to begin with. They tried to make this big scheme change, which backfired. And then they quickly realized they couldn't cover these Packers wide receivers. And Love also had the best passing game of his entire career from an accuracy perspective. And so it was like everything all at once worked against the Packers within that spot, and the Lions just did nothing to adjust. And so it was, to me, a spot for Green Bay that we're now looking at as this team that is progressing as an offense week after week. They're starting to get things going. I get that. They're much different with Aaron Jones back on the field. I get that. But like, the fact remains that Jordan Love, let's put it this way, the fact remains that the Lions staff as a whole did enough work to say, like, here's where Jordan Love struggles. Here's where we want to change our entire team to try to defend him. This is what we want to throw at him because we think it's our best chance of winning, even though it's so different, right? They identified all of this. They couldn't do it. What they identified is what the Chiefs do better than any team in the NFL. And so the Chiefs don't have to change what they want to do to try do what Detroit wanted to do and struggled to pull off in a massive way. And so I think this is a huge advantage for the Chiefs defense to be able to defend the Packers in a way where Jordan Love struggles to have success the most. And so I think that's the big thing that stands out to me. Chiefs play man coverage at a top 5 rate. They do so at a top 5 efficiency rating league-wide. They're going to have opportunities to slow down Green Bay. The question is, on the other side, you now have a Packers defense, which, although it's been trending up the last couple weeks, really struggles to defend the run. That's just been the MO with this defense for a number of seasons. And anytime that I'm watching the Chiefs this season and the burden is taken away a little bit from their wide receivers, and you can have a Pacheco game and you can have a consistent ground game to take a little bit of burden off, I think that that's a huge plus for the Chiefs. And so to me, that stands out pretty well. I don't know what the Packers are going to do to continuously sort of hold the Chiefs offense in check. And I really think that this is a spot where the Chiefs defense has a pretty big advantage that the Lions clearly identified that they just couldn't pull off. What really surprises me about this, and where I start to think that I am wrong with a lot of this, is internally there was like discussion early on in the week. And it's like, wow, let's look at the Chiefs. What can we get with Kansas City? This is something. And there wasn't a willingness to jump on it. And anytime that you've followed Right Angle Sports, you may notice that there's some interest in how the Chiefs are on a week-to-week basis. And despite this number coming down, it was kind of like I don't know. And there was one comment from somebody else that went as far as saying they thought the Packers might be the side within this. And so that gives me a lot of pause for concern. That makes me think that I may be completely off on my judgment and handicap within this game, which is just going to have me staying away. But that's how I see this game playing out. I think the Chiefs defense can exploit a lot of that too. Final game of the week, Monday Night Football. It is the Bengals on the road at the Jacksonville Jags, the game that fits the mold of so many others this week. You have the Jacksonville Jags out to a 9-point favorite, which is just a monster number. But on the other side, you have Jake Browning and the Cincinnati Bengals with their season done, sort of playing for irrelevance at this point. And the question is, are we just still overrating how bad this Bengals team is going to be? What we know about the Bengals for certain is that their defense is not getting better. This is a very bad defensive unit that gives up a ton of yardage, gives up a ton of points, and they're just not improving. Lou Anarumo gets so much credit for his in-game adjustments and everything that he does, but this is a Bengals defense that just gets shredded on a weekly basis. We have yet to see the Jacksonville Jags really put forth the best game they can on offense. Just hasn't happened this year. It's crazy. They seem just one foot always kind of stuck in the mud a little bit, and they just haven't had that big explosive game yet. Could definitely happen here. But I don't know if I want to run out and lay this inflated price with the Jags, even with them being at home hosting Jake Browning and the Cincinnati Bengals offense. And this, again, like it falls into the same category as Chargers Pats. Like, I certainly don't want to take the dog, but this price is just too inflated, like it is on the Chargers. We see this same Miami, Washington, inflated price, just can't take the dog. Same thing here, inflated price, but I just want no part of the dog. The total has been bet under 40.5, now down to 38. A lot of that reflects the offensive struggles for Cincinnati, but also, again, that offensive lack of pop and outburst that we've seen from the Jags. They just haven't been able to run up a big number on a lot of teams and do a lot. And defensively, they've been sneaky good, continuing to improve as guys get back. They played a stretch of games without their best corner in the secondary, now starting to get healthy, now starting to get better. Like that's why we're seeing this total come down. The Pittsburgh Steelers completely shut out Browning, and the Bengals produced a very ineffective game. I don't think they're going to be much more effective here on the road at the Jags. And if Jacksonville ends up just kind of leaning on the ground game, being a little bit more conservative later in the game if they're playing with the lead, which has been a characteristic of this team all season, then that certainly slows things down, reduces the expectation for points. But to me, it's just a spot where I'm staying away, as I am with a couple of these other games that kind of stand out, where you have this inflated favorite against a team that might be a lot worse than we're realizing or expecting it to be. Couple questions to wrap up here with comments. Matt St. Marie, Cabot Revelstoke looks phenomenal. I have controversial takes on this. It does look amazing. Everything about it looks fantastic. Being from that area and growing up there, there's some other terrific courses around it. However, it's very difficult to make a golf course in that area of Canada and not have it become gimmicky. A perfect example is Silvertip. Beautiful course, but as gimmicky of a course as there is. I would put Banff National in that same category. Stewart Creek is really the only course within that area that doesn't become kind of like a gimmicky spot. Obviously, Cabot and the Dream Golf guys, Corin Crenshaw, have always been like this link style, wide open. I'm very curious to see what they do with it, just because it's such a brutal landscape to do well. And so obviously excited for it. Great to have something represented in the western part of Canada where I'm from. I'm glad to see that, but I don't know how they're going to do it. If anyone can do it, it's them. No question about it, for the beautiful courses they design. But I'm very curious to see. I will say that Citrus Farms, top of my list up there with Pasatiempo to try play in 2024, as that course looks absolutely amazing. I was looking on forums the other day on Golf WRX, and they had pictures of like the reveal and how it looked. It was just amazing. So curious to see, but definitely strong opinions there on what's coming to Revelstoke for sure. Garrett Stone says, sort of off topic, but if Purdy gets the W, where do you see him in the MVP race? Why is he not number one, Garrett? I don't understand that. If he wins, he has to be the favorite, in my opinion. I'm surprised he isn't already. That's how I would look at that for sure. Molly Bet Sports, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it very much. What else have I missed here in this as we go? Let's get to Survivor now to wrap up. Steelers or Tampa for Survivor? Boy, it's a tough one. I don't envy anyone having to make this decision. We had a release on the Panthers at a better number than what's available now from the service. And so with that said, I would go to Pittsburgh just because I like the Steelers in the game, and we as a service like the Panthers back the other way. And so that would be my only justification for that. Here's what I'll say about Survivor now that we're talking about it late in the year. You have made it this far doing something to get you where you are. Some of it's luck, some of it's process. You've made it this far. Don't just go blindly relying on me or someone else to give you that pick now that you're this late in the season. Think about everything, take your time, make the decision, but don't put it on something else that's different from how you got to where you are. Stay steady with that. And so I say Pittsburgh just because I like the Steelers, and as a service, we released the Panthers. That's my justification for that, but you might find yourself in a different scenario than that as a whole. How do we know Flacco is actually better than DTR? Because DTR is probably the worst quarterback to be on the field in the last couple of seasons. And we know that PJ Walker the last decade is statistically the worst quarterback to be on the field. I don't think that Joe Flacco can be worse than either of those. And DTR might actually be worse than PJ Walker. He just hasn't played enough time to see it. And I will say this, and again, I don't want to be insensitive about it. If you sort the league by the last 10 years, there is a player that statistically ranks better than PJ Walker, and unfortunately, that player has already passed away. That is to put in perspective how bad PJ Walker is as a quarterback, and DTR is probably not any better. Yes, I think he is worse than Walker. We have seen nothing from DTR to suggest otherwise. It has to be an upgrade going to Joe Flacco, given his experience. What you're not going to get anything crazy from Flacco, but you're not going to get just mind-numbingly bad, ineffective play like you're getting with these other two guys as well. Worse than Nathan Peterman. Yes, he is worse than Nathan Peterman. Statistically, PJ Walker is worse than Nathan Peterman, and DTR could be worse than PJ Walker. I don't think that that's a stretch to say. So yes, that's putting in perspective how bad it is. I don't think anyone puts Joe Flacco in that same category, and that justifies an upgrade for this point spread too, especially against a Rams team that's just incredibly inflated. All right. Thanks everybody for stopping by for this week 13 show. Again, subscribe button down below. Hit the thumbs up before you leave. If you found anything in the show valuable, if you took anything away, would appreciate it very much. 49% unsubscribe rate watching the show when there's 6,000 views. That's too high. Let's get some subscribes down below. And I highly recommend, not just saying this to sell it, get over to raspicks.com/order. You will not regret purchasing the Bulls subscription that we have up on site. If you want the media behind it, on the Right Angle Sports podcast through Apple, you can see the results that Eddie and Michael Craig put together and how they think about games. There's so much uncertainty with these Bulls. There's so many changing pieces. These guys have it covered. You will not regret subscribing to that service. If you're watching the bowl games, if you're following it, if you're anticipating being at home or with friends or family over the holidays, you will want this bowl service on your side to give you some of those bets, especially with the early games as well. Molly says it right. 97 likes and 225 watching. How? Because people are so intrigued by the content being presented, they don't hit the thumbs up. But again, it helps me a lot if you hit that thumbs up. Appreciate Carlos stopping by as well. Love the logic. Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. Thanks to everybody who has stopped by and watched. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of the week. We'll see you back here next Wednesday, 9:15 a.m. Pacific time.